The ringing in my ears sharpened as my mother's words registered. Could you just not talk about your job this time? It makes things awkward for Caroline. The salad bowl trembled in my hands. The dinner I'd flown 1,000 miles to attend suddenly felt like a stage set designed to make me disappear. I caught my reflection in the silver serving spoon, blurred, distorted, exactly how they preferred me. Sorry, I said, setting the bowl down with deliberate care, though what I wanted was to shatter it. 3 degrees, 2 patents, and 1 multi-million-dollar company I'd built from nothing. And all my mother wanted was my silence. My name is Ivy. I'm 38 and the co-founder and chief research officer at a biotech firm in Boston. This is the story of how I stopped shrinking myself for people who never saw me anyway. That weekend was supposed to be a celebration of Caroline's promotion at her marketing firm. My younger sister, golden-haired and effortlessly likable, had received a small bump in title that warranted embossed invitations and place cards from our mother. The white colonial house in Ohio felt suffocating as always, but Caroline had texted me herself, "Please come. I want you there." So I'd booked a flight, taken time off from overseeing clinical trials that could change thousands of lives, and shown up with a gift and, apparently, the implicit understanding that I should mute the part of myself I was most proud of. I watched my father raise his glass at dinner, calling Caroline his brightest star. My mother beamed. Even Uncle Jerry, who typically contributed nothing beyond weather updates, told her how proud he was. I smiled too, but something bitter coated my tongue. This wasn't an isolated incident, just the latest verse in a lifelong chorus where Caroline's feelings mattered more than my achievements. Growing up, her crayon drawings earned prominent refrigerator placement while my science fair trophies disappeared into drawers. Her B grades were met with, "She tries so hard," while my A- prompted, "What happened?" I didn't resent Caroline herself. I'd braided her hair, helped her study, written portions of her college essays. But somewhere along the way, I realized my parents only looked at me with pride when I was standing in Caroline's shadow. After dessert, I escaped to the back porch with my wine. Caroline joined me minutes later. "You okay?" she asked. "Of course," I said, turning to face her. She hesitated. "I didn't know Mom said that to you, about not talking about your work." "It's fine." "No, it's not." I shrugged, the gesture as practiced as my smile. "It's not the first time." Caroline looked away, then back at me. "You know they love you, right?" I laughed, not cruelly, just tired. "Sure, in their way." "You've done amazing things, Ivy." "Not according to Mom or Dad." Caroline bit her lip. "I think sometimes they just don't get what you do. It's intimidating." There it was again. That word. I took a sip of wine to avoid saying what I wanted to say. Caroline stepped closer. "Maybe you could try explaining it differently? Make it more accessible?" I turned to her fully then. "I've published papers, Caroline. I've spoken on panels. I mentor young women in STEM. If they wanted to understand, they could." She didn't answer. The next morning, I made breakfast out of habit. My mother drifted into the kitchen, watched me work, then said, "You always make the fluffiest pancakes." Before I could respond, she thrust her phone at me. "Can you take a picture of Caroline outside with the flowers? She looks so radiant this morning." I did as she asked, photographing my sister among the hydrangeas while my pancakes cooled. That afternoon, I packed my bag and left early, claiming a work call that wasn't entirely a lie. Back in Boston, I lost myself in the rhythm of the lab. The investor call had gone exceptionally well. We were looking at another round of funding, $30 million. I posted the news on LinkedIn with professionally polished language, excited to share that our team has secured Series B funding. I didn't tag my family. I didn't text anyone. 3 days later, my Aunt Sharon called. "Ivy, why didn't you tell us? This is incredible." "Tell you what?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "The funding. Your mom showed me the article. Said she had to Google it." "Yeah, it wasn't really dinner conversation," I replied, the edge in my voice unmistakable. After we hung up, curiosity pulled me to Facebook. There it was. My mother had shared a news article. "Local biotech startup secures $30 million. Her caption read, "Proud Mom Moment," Our daughter Ivy is changing the world. I stared at the post for a long time. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt still. That was when I knew something had shifted, not in them, but in me. This time, I wouldn't call to say thanks. I wouldn't fly home to make pancakes. I wouldn't take pictures of my sister in the garden. I had nothing to prove anymore. They could share posts, beam with pride to everyone else, but they still wouldn't know me. And for the first time in my life, I realized that was okay. What I needed was peace, and I had finally found it. It was strange how quickly the quiet became addictive. Back in Boston, my phone didn't ring with guilt-laden invitations. My mornings started with coffee brewed exactly how I liked it. I worked hard. I spent time with people who actually saw me. I thought maybe the peace would settle everything, but it didn't. Because a few weeks after the funding announcement, my mother called again. Finally, I answered. "Hi, Mom." "Oh, good. You picked up." She sounded breathless. "I just wanted to talk about Thanksgiving. It's still 2 months away." "Yes, but I need a head count." And Caroline was wondering if you could do your sweet potato casserole. I stared at the spreadsheets on my monitor, data points that represented years of research, and not one question from her about any of it. "I'm not sure I'll be able to come this year. We're heading into clinicals." Silence. "Oh," she said finally. "Well, Caroline is bringing Nathan. We're all very excited." Nathan, the new boyfriend. Somehow he was already woven into the family like a new decorative pillow. "Tell her congratulations," I said. Another pause. "Ivy, we just miss you. It would mean a lot to see you. You missed me when I was sitting across from you, too." I hadn't meant to say it. It just slipped out. She didn't respond right away. "I don't know what you mean by that." "I know you don't." I ended the call gently but firmly. At work, things were moving fast. We were expanding our team, onboarding a new lab, managing investor relations. I loved it every second. And then came the invitation, not from my family, but from my alma mater. They wanted me to be the keynote speaker for their annual Women in Science and Innovation event. I said yes. The night before I flew out, Caroline texted me, "Mom said you're skipping Thanksgiving. Everything okay?" I replied, "Just busy. Hope it's a good one." She sent a heart emoji. The conference was held at a historic theater near campus. I stood backstage with my notes, dressed in a black suit and heels I'd broken in with conference floors and investor meetings. I stepped up to the podium and looked out at a sea of young women, some holding notebooks, some just holding their breath. I smiled. "When I was your age," I began, "I thought success would be the thing that finally earned me a seat at my own family's table. But here's what I learned. Success doesn't change people. It just makes their blind spots more obvious." I spoke for 20 minutes about resilience, about being overlooked, about building something from the ground up. Not because someone handed you a ladder, but because you carved one from every dismissal you endured. When I stepped off stage, I was surrounded by students and faculty, some with tears in their eyes. One professor whispered, "I should have seen it in you back then." That night, I opened the family group chat. Photos of Thanksgiving had flooded the feed. Under one photo, my mother had written, "Missed Ivy today, but Caroline's new stuffing recipe was a hit." I didn't reply, but I did send a photo of the auditorium from my keynote with a simple caption. "Spoke today. Went well." No one responded. 3 days passed. Then Caroline messaged me privately. "Mom's mad. Says you were showing off," and I nearly laughed. "I was working." "I know," she said. "It's just, you know how she is." Caroline paused. "It's like, if something isn't about her, she finds a way to make it feel like it's against her." I stared at that message. It was the most honest thing Caroline had said in years. "You ever get tired of translating for her?" I asked. "Every day," she replied. "But someone has to." "Do they? If I stop, she'll stop talking to me too." I didn't answer because I didn't know how to tell Caroline what I'd finally learned, that maybe letting someone stop talking to you wasn't the worst thing. Maybe it was freedom. 2 weeks later, the university published a video of my speech. It circulated quickly. Then the calls started again from relatives and old friends. It should have felt good, but I was starting to see that success couldn't fill the places where love should have been. It could only make the gaps more visible. Caroline called the week before Christmas. Would you be willing to come home for New Year's instead? Just for a day. It's less formal. Just us. I hesitated. Is Mom okay with that? She doesn't know I'm asking yet, but I thought, maybe if it's just us, it could be better? I could hear something in her voice. Not guilt, just weariness. That same tightrope walk I'd done for so long. I'll think about it, I said. When the 31st came around, I found myself boarding a morning flight to Columbus. When I pulled into the driveway, Caroline came out to greet me. She looked surprised, genuinely. I didn't think you'd come. I didn't either. Inside, the house was quiet. My parents were out visiting neighbors. It was just us and a pot of chili Caroline had made. She handed me a bowl. I wanted to ask you something about your speech. Sure. You said something about building a ladder from dismissals. She hesitated. Do you think I've been part of that? The dismissals? I looked at her. Really looked. Not on purpose, I said finally. But still, she pressed. Yeah, sometimes. Caroline looked down at her bowl, then back up. I'm sorry. I think I wanted them to love me so badly that I let them make me the center. I didn't realize what it was costing you. It was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged it. Not just my pain, but their role in it. I didn't cry, but something in my chest loosened. Thanks, I said. That means more than you know. She reached across the table and took my hand, and for the first time in years, the silence between us felt like something that could be rebuilt. Not perfectly, but honestly. I was halfway through folding laundry when I got the email that changed everything. Subject: Congratulations! You've been selected for Forbes 40 Under 40. My breath caught. Not because I'd been aiming for it, but because suddenly everything I had worked for was about to be broadcast in a way I couldn't control. The ceremony would be in New York. I was allowed to bring one guest. I stared at that part for a long time. Later that night, I thought about Caroline, how we'd sat in that quiet kitchen on New Year's Eve, how she didn't flinch when I told her the truth. So I texted her. I got invited to Forbes 40 Under 40. It's in NYC. Want to come as my guest? She replied in less than 5 minutes. What? Yes, I'll buy a dress tomorrow. I'm so proud of you, seriously. And she was. I could tell. It didn't erase the past, but it softened something. I didn't tell my parents. A week before the event, I got a voicemail from my dad. Heard the news, impressive stuff. Call your mother, she wants to talk. I didn't call back, wondering how he'd found out. Later, Caroline mentioned she'd excitedly told our cousin Emma about the award when they met for coffee, and word had quickly spread through the family grapevine. Caroline flew in 2 days early. She threw her arms around me like we hadn't seen each other in years. We stayed in a hotel off Central Park. The night of the gala, she helped me with my makeup. She insisted I wear the deep navy gown we'd picked out together. It brings out your eyes, she said. I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. Not because of the makeup, but because I didn't look like I was waiting for permission to be proud. The event was a blur, but the moment I walked onto that stage and held the plaque, something in me settled. Not because of the title, but because of the look on Caroline's face. She stood and clapped, like she'd been waiting her whole life to. After the ceremony, we walked back to the hotel in heels we both regretted. It was snowing lightly. You know, she said. When I told Mom we were coming, she didn't say anything. She just said, well, Ivy always liked to push herself. That was it. I laughed. That sounds exactly like her. I think she's jealous, Caroline said suddenly. She's your mother, too. I know, but she built her whole world around being the center of attention. You were supposed to orbit around her. Now people are looking at you instead. Later that night, Caroline reached for my hand. This was your moment, but thank you for letting me be in it. I squeezed her fingers. You earned it. She replied quietly, sometimes I think I spent my whole life trying to be liked, and you spent yours trying to be respected. That's not a bad summary. And the family chose likable. I let that sit for a while. Until now, I said. Back in Boston, things picked up again. The media requests increased. I did interviews, panels, wrote a piece for Scientific American. One Sunday, Caroline forwarded me a message from our mother. "Your sister looked polished in that interview." That was the entire text. I replied to Caroline with a single word, "Wow." She sent back, "I know, it's like pulling teeth." Still, Caroline kept reaching out. She asked about the company, my schedule. For the first time in years, our conversations weren't just reactive. They were curious. In March, about 2 months after the Forbes ceremony, she invited me to visit her in Chicago. "You won't have to see Mom and Dad, just me. I got a new place." Her apartment was modest but warm. After dinner, we sat on the floor sorting through an old photo album. One picture made me freeze. It was me, maybe 17, holding up a regional science fair medal. Behind me, slightly out of focus, Caroline with cake frosting on her cheek, laughing. "I don't even remember this," I said. "I do," she replied. "You won, and they didn't even come. They were at one of my recitals. I cried that night because I missed a note, and they took me out for ice cream." My mouth went dry. "That was the day I decided not to need them," I said. Caroline turned the page. There was another photo. All 4 of us. Thanksgiving, maybe 10 years ago. Everyone smiling. "Do you think they'll ever change?" she asked. But maybe we will." She nodded. The next morning, we walked by the lake talking about everything except our parents, and maybe that was progress. On the flight home, I stared out the window thinking of that old photo, me with the medal, alone in a frame no one remembered. But now I wasn't alone anymore. I had a company, a team, a voice, and a sister who saw me. And maybe that was what I had needed all along. Not to be the golden child, not to win their praise, just to be real and to be heard. The final straw came in the most ordinary way. A text. It was from my mom, just a screenshot of an article featuring Caroline's new promotional campaign at her firm. Underneath, Mom had typed, "So proud of your sister. Isn't this lovely?" I stared at it for a moment. No question, no greeting, no mention of the magazine spread I'd just done, or the talk I was preparing to give in D.C., just Caroline, always Caroline. I didn't reply. Later that night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine. There was a request from a journalist who wanted to profile me, not just about the company, but about my background, my family. They wanted the full story, and for the first time, I hesitated. Not because I was ashamed of where I came from, but because I wasn't sure if they deserved to be part of this chapter. "Don't mention your job," my mom had whispered at dinner. I had obeyed for years, bit my tongue until it bled, tried not to outshine, tried to be gracious, tried to be quiet. And then I made Forbes 40 under 40. They only found out through Google. A few days later, the journalist emailed again, including a draft of the article's first paragraph. Ivy Morgan was never the loudest person in the room, but she was always building something, even when no one noticed. That line hit me like a wave because that was exactly it. I hadn't needed applause. I had needed acknowledgement, not for ego, but for clarity, for connection, and maybe even for love. Caroline called a few days later. "Did you see what Mom posted?" I hadn't. I barely checked Facebook anymore. She shared the Forbes photo again, said proud of both my girls, one with heart, one with hustle. I let the silence sit there. Caroline sighed. "It's like she can't compliment you without putting herself in the spotlight or putting me in your shadow." I know, it's exhausting. Then Caroline said something unexpected. "I think I'm going to pull back from them, just for a while. I need space." I felt my chest tighten, then soften. "You don't need my permission." "I know. I just wanted you to know." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. That weekend, I flew to D.C. for a talk. I stood on stage in front of hundreds of researchers, students, and policymakers and told the truth about what it meant to build something while invisible. Afterward, a young woman came up to me. "Can I ask something personal?" she said. "Of course." "How did you keep going when no one believed in you?" I looked at her and thought about late nights in undergrad, the dismissive comments from advisors, the way my mother once called my PhD defense a nice little presentation. I stopped waiting for belief, I said, and I started building without it. Turns out belief comes later. Sometimes from strangers, sometimes not at all, but by then, you won't need it. She nodded. Tears welled, but she blinked them back. Back at the hotel that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm, settled, whole. It didn't matter if they ever understood what I'd done, if they ever saw the hours, the sacrifice, the brilliance of what I had created. Because I saw it, I lived it, I kept it alive. And Caroline had started to see it too. Not just my success, but my silence. The cost of being the one who always carried the weight while everyone else celebrated. A few weeks later, a package arrived at my office. No note, just a small framed photo. It was the same science fair picture Caroline and I had found in her album. The one where I held my medal while she stood in the background with cake on her cheek. But in this version, she had zoomed in, cropped it. The frame held only me, 17, proud, alone, but smiling. I placed it on my desk. That girl had done everything without applause, but she'd done it anyway. Now the world could see her. And even if the people at home never truly understood her worth, she finally did, and she wasn't going to shrink again for anyone. The text message jolted me physically, a sudden tightness in my chest as if someone had cranked a vise around my ribcage. My vision tunneled until the phone screen was the only thing in focus, the rest of my corner office on the 42nd floor blurring at the edges. Hey sis, hope you don't mind, but I sold your Honda for $5,000. You never drive it anyway, and I really needed the cash. Thanks for understanding. Ha ha ha. I read the message 3 times, each pass sending a new wave of disbelief crashing through me. The quarterly reports I'd been analyzing lay forgotten as I slowly placed my coffee cup on the desk with deliberate precision, afraid that if I moved too quickly, I might shatter something or someone. What my brother Victor thought he had sold for $5,000 wasn't my old Honda. It was a 2019 McLaren 720S Spider worth $347,000, registered as a company asset to Apex Capital Management, the $4.2 billion investment firm I'd built from nothing over 6 years, while my family remained completely unaware. My name is Natalie. I'm 34 and the secret CEO of a multi-billion-dollar investment firm. This is the story of how I exposed a family betrayal that cost my brother everything. For 6 years, I'd maintained 2 separate lives. To the business world, I was Natalie Parker, ruthless financial prodigy and founder of Apex Capital Management. To my family, I was just Natalie, the daughter who worked some mid-level finance job and lived in a modest apartment across town. I'd kept my success hidden deliberately. No mansions, no flashy lifestyle around them, just the old Honda Civic I drove to family gatherings. The McLaren was strictly for business purposes, client meetings, and industry events. No one in my family had ever seen it, until Victor apparently found the keys I'd accidentally left at our parents' house after dinner 2 weeks ago. I picked up my phone and typed a single word. Interesting. Then I pressed the intercom. Rebecca, please get Thomas Bennett from legal on the line immediately and cancel my 4 p.m. meeting. Something urgent has come up. While waiting for the call, I pulled up the vehicle documentation on my computer. The McLaren was registered to Apex Capital Management with me as the authorized driver, purchased as a company asset for client entertainment. This wasn't just car theft. It was federal grand theft auto of corporate property. The phone rang. Thomas, I need you to listen carefully because this is going to sound unbelievable. What's the situation, Natalie? My brother just texted me to inform me that he sold company vehicle VIN SAJAD 4GX5CN01234 for $5,000. The McLaren? He sold the McLaren? The disbelief in Thomas's voice mirrored my own internal state. Apparently, he thought it was my personal Honda Civic. After a long pause, Thomas spoke slowly. Natalie, that's a $350,000 vehicle registered as company property. That's not just theft. That's major felony theft of corporate assets. I'm aware. What's our protocol for this situation? We have to report it immediately. Federal law requires us to report theft of company assets over $100,000 within 24 hours. The FBI handles cases involving interstate commerce and vehicles of this value. I stared at Victor's cheerful text message again, complete with that smiling emoji that now seemed like a slap in the face. Thomas, file the report immediately. Include the text message as evidence and request that they move quickly before the vehicle leaves the jurisdiction. Natalie, you realize this means your brother will be arrested. A cold resolve settled over me. My brother stole a company car worth $250,000. The law is the law. But surely he didn't know. Thomas, ignorance of the value doesn't change the fact that he took someone else's property without permission and sold it. File the report. After hanging up, I walked to the window of my office, looking out at the city skyline while processing how we'd gotten to this point. Victor was my younger brother by 3 years. For his entire adult life, he'd operated under the assumption that I was his struggling older sister who worked some boring finance job. He worked as a sales manager at a furniture store and was constantly in financial trouble, living paycheck to paycheck, mounting credit card debt, and a gambling problem he thought no one knew about. He'd been borrowing money from various family members for months, always with elaborate stories about temporary setbacks and promises to pay everyone back. Last week, he'd asked to borrow my Honda to help a friend move furniture. I'd agreed, assuming he meant the actual Honda Civic I kept in my apartment building's garage. Instead, he'd somehow gotten hold of the McLaren keys. My phone buzzed with another text from Victor. The buyer seemed really excited about the car, said something about it being a rare model. Anyway, thanks again for being cool about this. I stared at the message in disbelief. The buyer had probably just acquired a $350,000 supercar for $5,000 and was undoubtedly thrilled. Victor, meanwhile, had no idea he'd just committed a federal felony. Rebecca knocked on my door. Ms. Parker, I have Agent Olivia Martinez from the FBI Financial Crimes Division on line 1. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. Agent Martinez, thank you for calling so quickly. Ms. Parker, I've reviewed the initial report from your legal team. Can you confirm that your brother took and sold a 2019 McLaren 720S Spider without your knowledge or permission? That's correct. He sent me a text message approximately an hour ago informing me that he'd sold what he thought was my Honda Civic for $5,000. The vehicle is registered as a company asset. Yes, to Apex Capital Management. We're going to need to move quickly on this. Do you know the identity of the buyer? No, but my brother mentioned that the buyer seemed excited about getting a rare model. I suspect the buyer knew exactly what they were purchasing. That suggests potential conspiracy or receipt of stolen goods. We'll need to interview your brother immediately to get the buyer's information. Agent Martinez, I should mention that my brother has no idea about the actual value of the car or my business. He genuinely believes he sold a worthless old Honda. That doesn't change the legal situation, Ms. Parker. Theft is theft, regardless of the perpetrator's knowledge of the item's value. I understand. I just wanted you to be aware of the circumstances. We'll be in touch within the next few hours. Please don't contact your brother or anyone else about this until we've had a chance to investigate. At 6:30 p.m., my phone rang with my mother's number. The moment I'd been dreading had arrived. Natalie, something terrible has happened. FBI agents came to Victor's apartment and arrested him. They said something about car theft, but that doesn't make any sense. Victor doesn't steal cars. I closed my eyes and pressed my fingertips against my temples. Mom, where are you now? At the police station with your father. Victor is asking for a lawyer, but we don't understand what's happening. The agents mentioned your name. They said you filed a complaint. Mom, I need you and Dad to sit down. I'm going to explain everything, but it's complicated. Natalie, please just tell me what's going on. Victor borrowed what he thought was my Honda Civic. Instead, he took and sold a McLaren that belongs to my company. It's worth about $350,000. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. Natalie, that's not possible. You don't own a $350,000 car. Actually, Mom, I do. And it's not the only one. What do you mean? I mean that your daughter, who you think works a regular office job, actually runs a $4.2 billion investment firm. Another long silence. Natalie, this isn't the time for jokes. I'm not joking, Mom. I'm the CEO of Apex Capital Management. I have been for 6 years. But you live in that little apartment. You drive that old Honda. Because I chose to keep my success private from the family, because I wanted to see who you all were when you thought I had nothing. And now Victor is in jail. Victor committed federal grand theft auto. He stole company property and sold it illegally. But he didn't know. That doesn't change the law, Mom. I could hear my father's voice in the background asking what was happening. Mom put me on speaker. Dad needs to hear this too, Natalie. Natalie. Dad's voice came through clearly. Can you explain what's happening to your brother? Dad, Victor asked to borrow what he thought was my old Honda. Instead, he took a McLaren worth $350,000 that's registered as company property. He sold it for $5,000 and texted me about it like it was no big deal. A McLaren, Natalie? How do you have a McLaren? Because I own Apex Capital Management. It's an investment firm worth $4.2 billion. I could hear both my parents talking at once, their voices overlapping in confusion and disbelief. Listen, I said loudly enough to cut through their conversation. I know this is shocking, but right now we need to focus on Victor. He's going to need a very good lawyer, and he's going to need one immediately. Natalie, Dad's voice was strained. Can you help him? Can you drop the charges? Dad, it's not that simple. Once a theft of this magnitude is reported, it becomes a federal matter. I can't just drop the charges. But you could try. I could talk to the prosecutor about Victor's circumstances and his lack of knowledge about the car's value. But Dad, he still committed a serious crime. Over the next 2 hours, I found myself coordinating my brother's legal defense, while simultaneously trying to explain to my parents how their daughter had become a billionaire without them noticing. I arranged for Victor to be represented by Jessica Williams, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the city. I also called Agent Martinez to provide additional context about Victor's financial situation and gambling problems. Agent Martinez, I want to be clear that I'm not trying to excuse my brother's actions, but I think you should know that he has significant gambling debts and has been desperate for money. That actually makes the situation worse, Ms. Parker. It establishes motive for the theft. I understand, but I also think you should know that he genuinely had no idea what he was selling. If he'd known it was worth $350,000, he wouldn't have sold it for $5,000. We'll take that into consideration during our investigation. The next morning, I received a call from Jessica Williams. Natalie, I've met with your brother. He's in complete shock about the situation. What's his status? He's been charged with federal grand theft auto and conspiracy to commit wire fraud since he sold the vehicle across state lines using online platforms. The conspiracy charge relates to the buyer, who we believe knew the car's actual value. What's he looking at in terms of sentencing? If convicted on all charges, potentially 10 to 15 years in federal prison. I felt sick to my stomach. Jessica, what can we do? The prosecutor is willing to consider a plea deal if Victor cooperates fully in recovering the vehicle and identifying the buyer. They're also interested in information about any other stolen property transactions. Other transactions? Natalie, it appears your brother has been involved in several questionable sales over the past few months. The FBI is investigating whether this was part of a larger stolen property operation. This was getting worse by the hour. That afternoon, I drove to the Federal Detention Center to visit Victor. He looked terrible, pale, shaken, and about 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. Natalie, I don't understand any of this. They're saying I stole a $350,000 car, but I swear I thought it was just your old Honda. Victor, where did you get the keys? From the key hook at Mom and Dad's house. There were 2 sets of car keys hanging there. I took the ones that looked newer. The newer keys were for the McLaren. But why did you have a McLaren at Mom and Dad's house? I looked at my brother through the reinforced glass, realizing that the conversation we were about to have would change our relationship forever. Because I drove it to family dinner 2 weeks ago, because I own several cars and that's the one I happened to take that day. Natalie, this doesn't make sense. How do you own a McLaren? You work in finance. Victor, I don't just work in finance. I own a finance company, a big one. I spent the next 30 minutes explaining Apex Capital Management, my role as founder and CEO, and the scope of my business success. Victor listened with an expression of growing amazement and horror as he realized the magnitude of what he'd done. Natalie, you're saying you're rich, like really rich. I'm saying I'm very successful, and the car you sold was worth more than most people's houses. But why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were just getting by? Because I wanted to see who you all really were when you thought I had nothing to offer you. And now I know that when you needed money, instead of asking your successful sister for help, you decided to steal what you thought was my worthless car. Victor put his head in his hands. Natalie, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I know you didn't. But Victor, this isn't just about the car. The FBI thinks you've been involved in other stolen property sales. What? Oh, Natalie, I've never stolen anything before in my life. Then explain the investigation into your eBay sales. Explain the electronics and jewelry you've been selling online over the past few months. Victor's face went pale. Those weren't stolen. Those were items I won gambling. You won $50,000 worth of electronics and jewelry gambling. Natalie, I know how it sounds, but I swear those were legitimate winnings. I looked at my brother and realized he was probably telling the truth about the other items, but lying to himself about his gambling problem being under control. Victor, the FBI is going to want documentation of every item you've sold and where you got it. If you really won everything gambling, you'll need to provide proof. Over the next week, the investigation expanded as the FBI traced the McLaren to a sophisticated car theft ring operating across 3 states. The buyer who'd purchased the car from Victor was actually a known fence who specialized in high-end vehicles. Victor's cooperation led to the arrest of 6 other people and the recovery of over $2 million worth of stolen vehicles. In exchange for his assistance, the prosecutor agreed to reduce the charges to a single count of grand theft with a recommendation for probation and community service. But the real reckoning came at the family meeting I called for the following Sunday. I gathered my parents, Victor, and my sister Jennifer at Mom and Dad's house to have the conversation we should have had years ago. Before we talk about Victor's situation, I need to address the bigger issue here. I began. For 6 years, I've been living a double life. You've all thought I was struggling financially, while I've actually been building a multi-billion-dollar business. Jennifer was the first to speak. Natalie, are you seriously telling us you're rich and you've been pretending to be poor? I'm telling you that I built something extraordinary, and I wanted to see if my family would love and support me when they thought I had nothing to offer. And what did you learn? Dad asked. I learned that when Victor needed money, he chose to steal from me rather than ask for help. I learned that none of you ever asked about my goals, my dreams, or what I was working toward. I learned that you all made assumptions about my life based on external appearances. Victor looked up from the table. Natalie, if I'd known about your success, I never would have taken the car. Victor, if you'd known about my success, you would have asked me for money instead of gambling it away. You still wouldn't have addressed the real problem. What real problem? Your gambling addiction, your inability to manage money, your pattern of making desperate decisions when you're in trouble. The conversation that followed was difficult, but necessary. Victor admitted to gambling debts totaling over $80,000. Jennifer revealed that she'd been loaning him money for months. My parents confessed that they'd been worried about both of their children, Victor because of his obvious financial problems, and me because they thought I was failing to achieve my potential. The irony, I told them, is that you were worried about the wrong child. Natalie, Mom said, we're proud of your success, but we're hurt that you didn't trust us with the truth. Mom, the truth is that I built something incredible while you all assumed I was failing. The truth is that when Victor needed help, his first instinct was to take what he thought was my worthless possession rather than ask his family for support. But we would have helped him, Dad protested. Would you? With what money? None of you had any idea that I could have solved Victor's problems with a single phone call. 6 months later, Victor completed his community service and started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. I hired him as a junior analyst at Apex Capital Management with the understanding that any relapse into gambling would result in immediate termination. The McLaren was eventually recovered, though it required significant repairs after being damaged during the police chase that ended the car theft ring's operation. My relationship with my family improved dramatically once everything was out in the open. I moved out of my modest apartment and into a penthouse that reflected my actual financial situation. I started driving my luxury cars to family events instead of the Honda Civic. But the most important change was that we began having honest conversations about money, success, and what it means to support each other as a family. Victor called me one evening about a year after his arrest. "Natalie, I need to ask you something." "What's that?" "Do you think you'll ever really forgive me for what I did?" I considered the question. "Victor, I forgave you the day it happened, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen." "What does it mean?" "It means I gave you a second chance to show me who you really are. It means I chose to believe you could learn from your mistakes and become better." "And have I become better?" "You tell me. You've been clean for a year. You're working hard. You're paying back your debts. You're making good choices." "I am. And Natalie, thank you for not giving up on me." "That's what family does, Victor. Real family doesn't give up on each other, but real family also doesn't steal from each other." "I know. I'm sorry it took me getting arrested to figure that out." The experience taught me something important about family dynamics and the difference between love and respect. My family had always loved me, but they hadn't respected me when they thought I was unsuccessful. Victor had taken the car because he saw me as someone whose possessions didn't matter, whose success didn't exist, whose life could be disrupted without consequences. Now our relationships were built on mutual respect and honest communication. Victor understood that actions have consequences regardless of intentions. My parents understood that success comes in many forms and assumptions can be dangerous. And I understood that sometimes the most expensive lesson isn't the one you pay for, it's the one you teach. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, check out some audiobooks. They're a great way to absorb knowledge on the go.